How do you measure success in the UFC? Is it wins? Is it excitement? Is it championships? Is it blood? The reason it's called prize fighting, though, is because at the end of the day, the winner is the person who makes the most money. Moolah, that's what it's all about. And the UFC has come out the big winner on several occasions. Massive pay-per-view events can draw the most casual MMA fan back into the sport, and for 1 or 2 days make MMA the talk of the sporting world. The best indicator of success is pay-per-view buys. So here are the top 10 UFC pay-per-views with the most pay-per-view buys. UFC 194, 1,025,000 buys. The biggest fight in featherweight history. That's what the fight was billed as, and it lived up to the hype. The main event, Aldo vs McGregor, saw both go on an exhausting world tour. By the end, I was even tired of the whole thing. The momentum for this was unmatched. That was until Jose Aldo got injured. McGregor went on to win the interim title, putting even more at stake once the fight was made. Looking back, it's surprising that this event only did just over 1 million buys. For the year of build-up and anticipation, ironically the fight only lasted 13 seconds. It was an incredible moment and made Conor McGregor a star, and this isn't the last time you'll see him on this list, this is just the beginning for him. And this fight, let's be honest, it sold the event, but the co-main event of Weidman and Rockhold definitely didn't hurt. And speaking of Weidman, UFC 168, 1,025,000 buys. Weidman shocked the world when he knocked out Anderson Silva in their first fight. The untouchable, greatest middleweight ever was finally slayed. Was it luck though? It had to have been lucky. Anderson was just playing though. He'll fight, he'll be serious in the rematch, okay? Or was it luck? Is Chris Weidman the perfect counter to the great Anderson Silva? Just so many questions and so much on the line. That is what UFC 168 was all about, answering those questions. Not to mention the co-main event featured Ronda Rousey defending her title against Miesha Tate. We'll talk more about Rousey's drawing power in a bit, she comes up later. The card had more than enough for fight fans and casuals to throw their money and buy the event. Most of the questions weren't answered in the main event due to, well, but it was still a hell of a lead up, and overall, an amazing event. UFC 66, 1,050,000 buys. This is the only event on the list that took place before I was a fan of the UFC, and there aren't many photos I can use since SB Nation actually wasn't around at the time. I was also 12 years old. But I do know that Liddell and Ortiz are UFC legends and that this fight broke through to the mainstream. I mean, over 1 million buys in 2006 is crazy for the UFC. Liddell knocked out Ortiz in their first fight, and there was a lot of bad blood as well as a long history between the two. Both had been coaches on the new, exciting reality show, The Ultimate Fighter, giving them an even bigger mainstream audience. And that's all I really know about the event. It was huge. UFC 116, 1,060,000 buys. Brock Lesnar. Yeah, that's about it. You put Brock Lesnar on a card in 2010 and it'll sell 1 million buys no matter what. Not a single fighter on the rest of the card had headlined pay-per-view before this, so this was the Brock Lesnar show. 2 giant dudes with championships, 1 million buys. Yep, 2010 was a simpler time for the heavyweight division. UFC 193, 1,100,000 buys. We are now entering the true Ronda Rousey part of this list, and unfortunately for Ronda, her 2 biggest pay-per-view events were ones where she was defeated, coming off of a 34-second KO of Bethe Correia, a 14-second submission of Kat Zingano, and a 16-second KO of Alexis Davis. Rousey's stock had never been higher. Rousey was now one of the best strikers, so why not put her up against an actual good striker? Stakes got even higher when Rousey lashed out at home at the weigh-ins. That cranked things up all the way to 10, and is likely the reason the event passed the 1 million mark. The rest is history, as Holm head kicked Rousey's head off in front of 56,000 Australian fans in person and over 1 million paying customers watching live at home. UFC 207, 1,100,000 pay-per-view buys. Hey, it's Ronda again. After a year away from the sport, Ronda decided to come back and face the champion. So, Holly Holm rematch? Nope, Holm lost the title to Miesha Tate. Oh, so an epic trilogy match where Tate is the champion? Nope. She lost the title to Amanda Nunes at UFC 200, which barely missed this list at 1,900,000 buys. So now Ronda is going up against a name that is unknown to mainstream audiences, and Rousey is refusing to do any type of media promotion for the fight. Guess what? That didn't matter. The event was huge and did 1.1 million buys. The co-main event of Garbrandt vs. Cruz definitely didn't hurt, but again, let's be honest, it was the Ronda Rousey show, which had a disappointing series finale for its star. UFC 205, 1,300,000 pay-per-view buys. New York, New York. If you've been a fan of the UFC for a while, you'll have a good idea how badly the UFC wanted to hold fights at Madison Square Garden. Unfortunately, MMA was banned in the state of New York. Finally, the ban was lifted in 2016. The UFC wanted to go big for their first New York show, and yeah, they succeeded. 3 title fights, with a headliner featuring the sport's biggest star, Conor McGregor. McGregor had the featherweight title, was looking for a second title, and had just come off of 2 huge pay-per-views against Nate Diaz, which we will get to in a bit. McGregor did his job in promoting the fight, the UFC went all out for New York City, and in return they got 1.3 million pay-per-view buys. Oh, and McGregor as a double champ. I wonder how long that'll last. UFC 196, 1,317,000 pay-per-view buys. Yes, we are deep into the Conor McGregor part of this list. After knocking out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds, fans were wondering what he would do for an encore performance. Why not go after a second title? Sure, but who's champion? Rafael dos Anjos? Well, McGregor is gonna have to do some work to promote this fight. Well, less than 2 weeks before the fight, and RDA pulls out with a foot injury. Aldo declined the rematch, which was a good call, let's be honest, and Frankie Edgar was healing a groin injury. In steps Nate Diaz. What? Nate Diaz? Why? Well, Diaz had called out McGregor on the mic 3 months before after defeating Michael Johnson. This call-out would change the course of UFC history, starting the most profitable and exciting rivalry in the sport's history. So Diaz was in, both fighters got testy with each other before the fight, and then Diaz did his thing. He shocked the world. Oh, also, let's give credit to Holm defending her title for the first time against Miesha Tate. That definitely added to the pay-per-view buys. Man, if this fight between Diaz and McGregor did over 1.3 million buys, imagine how much a rematch would do. UFC 100, 1,600,000 buys. The UFC wanted to make the event big. So how do you make an event big in 2009? Yep, Brock Lesnar. Oh, and let's put him up against the only man to ever defeat him in the cage, former heavyweight champion Frank Mir. Yeah, that'll break 1 million buys. But what if we wanted to get well past 1 million? Good-looking French-Canadian champion who just headlined a pay-per-view against BJ Penn in the first ever champion vs. champion fight and drew nearly 1 million buys? Yeah, let's put him on the card. Oh, and for good measure, we'll do an Ultimate Fighter season where at the end, the coaches fight at UFC 100. That's perfect. We'll put Dan Henderson against Michael Bisping, and people will want to see the true American wrestler knock out the cocky loudmouth Brit. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you get 1.6 million pay-per-view buys. UFC 202, 1,650,000 buys. The rematch, the most anticipated fight in UFC history. The bad blood between the two had reached an all-time high, as McGregor was desperate to erase this image from the public's consciousness. The Diaz boys got up to no good at the press conference, and bottles started flying, cranking things up from 10 to 12. Not to mention that McGregor had been making headlines for feuding with the UFC, leading to his quote-unquote removal from UFC 200. This was also the first event under the full control of the UFC's new owners, WME, IMG, and man, they must have felt like they hit the jackpot. The event did 1.65 million pay-per-view buys, and viewers got their money's worth with a 5-round war. That's it for the top 10. Amazingly, 9 out of 10 pay-per-views on this list had Rousey, Lesnar, or McGregor. Without those 3 right now, what event could the UFC put on that would draw more than 1 million buys? Comment down below and make sure to subscribe to MMA Nation.